Deathwatch Chapter 15. For the last 7 hours, Ben had thought how happy he was going to be when he pulled that Jeep up in front of the sheriff's office. Only then would this thing finally end. Only then would he be back among decent people. The sheriff's office was in a small wooden building with some Palo Verde trees around it. As Ben swung the Jeep off the street, he saw 3 sheriff's station wagons parked in the combination jail and garage behind the office. He felt no happiness at all as he braked the Jeep to a stop. Instead, the ending of movement seemed to let a great weight of weariness fall on him. It took an effort to reach out and turn the ignition off. As he got out, he staggered a little, holding the Jeep for balance. He ached all over and felt a little sick, cold spit running around his teeth. "You're out of your mind," Maddox said in a choked, angry voice. "I have to go to a hospital. A doctor, get in." Ignoring him, Ben walked stiffly across the dark parking lot. The air conditioning unit on the roof of the office was running rough, and he wondered why they didn't get it fixed. It seemed to be shaking the little building. The sheriff's office was one large room with some closets and toilets on the right, a long wooden bench near the door, 3 desks, and a business-like radio built into the wall. To Ben, the air felt very cold and dry and thick, with stale cigarette smoke. Ben had expected to find Sergeant Hamilton, the sheriff in charge, but the only person in the room was a young deputy named Strick, who was sitting at one of the desks filling out some sort of form. Strick. His full name was Eugene Strick, but no one ever called him anything but Strick. Had been in Ben's class in high school. A good-looking, rugged guy who, for as long as Ben could remember, had always wanted to be a sheriff. That alone had set him a little apart from the others in the class, and no one, including Ben, really knew Strick very well. Behind Strick on the wall was a big electric clock. They had made a pretty good time. It was only a little past 9. As Ben closed the door, Strick looked up and then stared at him. "Holy mackerel, Ben, what happened?" he asked. Ben had thought Hamilton would be there. Ham was an old friend, a good hunting and fishing buddy, and a warmer, more understanding man than Strick. "What hit you, Ben?" Strick asked, getting up and coming over to look at him. "A couple of mountains," Ben said. "Is Ham here?" "No, he's gone home. Look, you go see the doctor and you can fill out any accident reports when he gets through. You're in bad shape, Ben." "I've got a dead man out in the Jeep," Ben told him, "and I've got the man who killed him." "You got what?" "Trouble," Ben said, "but he needs a doctor worse than I do, so how about calling the D&T and see if anybody's there?" As Strick went back to his desk for his belt, he said, "The doc's there. I just sent him ahead on." He buckled on his belt. "You've got a dead man, you say? Who is he?" "I don't know. An old man out on the desert. It was an accident." Strick adjusted his belt, feeling for the butt of the pistol. "Let me have a look, Ben, before we do any talking. With all these new rules, we've got to be real careful in things like this." Strick put on his wide-brimmed hat, and Ben followed him out the door. Outside in the dark, they walked together over to the Jeep. "Who's this?" Strick asked, pulling a flashlight out of the leather case on his belt and shining it in on Maddox. Then he backed off. "Oh, Strick," said. "It's you, Mr. Maddox. How are you?" "I've been shot. I need a doctor," Maddox said. "Yes, sir. You want to get out and come inside, sir?" "How can I?" Maddox said coldly. "My hands and feet are tied with a rope." "What?" Strick said, and then turned to Ben. What's going on, Ben? It's a long story, and he needs the doctor first. Strick raised the flashlight and shone it in on Ben's face. Where's the dead man? Ben walked around to the back and unfolded a tarp. Strick shone the light on the old man's face. Ugh, he said. No idea who he is? No, just an old prospector, an old man. You better come back inside, Strick said. Look, Strick, I'm hurt, and so is Maddock. I'll leave the old man here, and we'll go down to the center. Strick hesitated and then went back to Maddock. Where are you hurt, Mr. Maddock? Ben almost killed me, Maddock said in a weak voice. He broke my hand and broke my leg and just cut me to ribbons. What are you getting tied up for, Ben? Strick asked, his voice unpleasant. Because he's dangerous. Who are you kidding, Strick said. Untie him and we'll take him down to the center. I'll get a car. As Strick went toward the garage, Ben leaned in and pushed Maddock forward so he could reach the rope. This is your last chance, Ben, Maddock said in a low, quick voice. $10,000. Take it and your troubles are over. If you don't take it, I'll see to it that you spend the next 10 years in jail. I can do that to you, Ben. Believe me, I can. I believe you, Ben said, untying his ankles. You won't take it? No. All right, Maddock said as the station wagon moved toward them. If you thought I was tough in the desert, you haven't seen anything yet. Strick came over and gently helped Maddock into the back seat of the wagon. Just lie down there, sir. It's only a couple of blocks. Thank you, officer, Maddock said. And Strick got in and said, you bring the Jeep, Ben. Take it around to the back where they can get the body out. Ben followed the white wagon down to the brand new diagnostic and treatment center, which was the closest thing the town had to a real hospital. As the station wagon drew up under the lights of the emergency entrance, Ben drove on around to the back, parked, and went over to the door. It was locked, so he rang the bell and stood leaning against the wall until the door opened and a kid about 19 named Sochek looked out. You got the wrong door, Ben. I got a dead man in the Jeep. Wrong address, too, Sochek said. We don't take 'em in, we carry 'em out. He started to close the door, but Ben held it open. Strick said, bring him in. Who does Strick think he is? Yes, sir, Mr. Strick. Anything you say. Okay, sir? Okay, I'll get something. What happened to him? He got shot. Sochek came back with a big canvas laundry basket on a dolly, and they lowered the old man, still wrapped in the tarp, down into the basket and wheeled him into the building. In the light, Ben saw that the tarp had fallen back and the old man's face, gray and shriveled looking, was exposed, his mouth and eyes open. Sochek flung a soiled sheet over the basket and said, What happened to you? I slid, Ben said. Is Doc Myers here? No, he's in Phoenix. Nobody here? The boy genius is here. That bothered Ben. All the way across the desert, he'd expected that Doc Myers would be here and would, in that way he had, take charge of everything. Doc Myers had seen it all, life, death, sickness, accidents. You couldn't shake him. Everybody in town called this new doctor in the center the boy genius. Ben had heard that he was the youngest man ever to graduate from the medical school at the University of California, and had made the highest marks in the school's history or something. And everybody in town wondered why such a genius had decided to come to work in this little dry and drying up town on the edge of the desert. A doctor like him, a boy genius, there must be something wrong with him, the town decided, and there was a lot of talk, a lot of speculation, and a lot of rumors. His name was Saunders, and he was a thin, dark, intense man who had nothing to say to you if you weren't sick or hurt. Ben had only met him once when his uncle had broken a finger in a Jeep transmission and didn't have any feeling about the doctor one way or the other. A little cold, maybe, a little haughty, but he seemed to know what he was doing. He followed Sobchak down the corridor to the emergency room and went in. Dr. Sanders, in a blood-stained green smock, and a nurse were in there and had Maddock up on the table. Under the bank of hard lights, Maddock looked pretty bad. His leg from the knee down was a mess of blood and dirt, and both his hands and arms were covered with blood. Ben started over to the doctor, but Strick saw him and put his hand on Ben's chest, pushing him back toward the door. "You stay outside," Strick told him. "You too, Sobchak." Outside the room, Ben pushed the laundry basket out of the way and sat down on a bench, stretching his legs out, his heels sliding along the floor. Sobchak rolled the basket into the closet and came out with a big floor polisher. As he started unraveling the cord, he said, "What'd you shoot him for, Ben?" "I didn't," Ben said. "Then who did?" Ben motioned with his thumb towards the emergency room. "He did." Sobchak stared at him. "Shot himself?" "Oh, him," Ben said. "No, I shot him." "What for?" "To keep him from shooting me." "Oh boy, what'd you guys do? Find a gold mine or something and then got into a fight about it?" "Something like that," Ben said, letting his eyes fall shut. He had never felt so tired, so drained out in his life. "You mind moving your feet so I can polish?" Sobchak asked. Without opening his eyes, Ben pulled his feet back, lifted them wearily, and put them down on the bench. The polisher made a hideous screaming noise. He must have fallen asleep, for it seemed that it was only a few seconds later that the door opened and Dr. Saunders wheeled Maddock out on a rolling bed and took him down the corridor. Then Strick came out and beckoned to him. "Your turn," he said, and then followed Saunders in and Maddock into a room across the hall. Ben had known the nurse, Emma Williams, all his life. And as he came in, he said, "Hello, Emma." She was putting a clean sheet on the high, narrow table and didn't say anything until she finished. Then she turned and looked at him. "That just goes to show you never can tell," she said, and went on fussing around. She must be as tired as I am, Ben thought, as he sat down. "Don't sit there," Emma said sternly. Ben thought he wasn't going to make it up off the stool. The doctor came in, glanced at him, and said, "Take off your clothes down to your shorts." Then he went over to a glass door cabinet and began taking things out of it. "I haven't got any shorts," Ben said. The doctor glanced at him with a cold and disgusted look, but didn't say anything. Emma, as though holding out a live snake, handed him a towel. It was painful getting his shoes and socks off, and his bare feet began to bleed on the floor as he got his pants off, wrapped the towel around himself, and started to take off his shirt. The cloth felt as though it had become his skin, and when he pulled at it, it felt as though he were ripping his skin off. It made him dizzy, and he had to stop and hold on to the edge of the table to keep from falling down. The doctor came over and with one quick, painful yank stripped the shirt off. The doctor said. "All right, get on the table, face down." The cool, clean sheet and hard table felt delicious. The doctor's hands touching him here and there hurt, but they were cool, gentle, and strong. Ben heard him say crisply, "All right, nurse. Before we start, I want you to write this down." "You better say it so those sheriffs can understand, or you'll have to do it all over again," Emma said disagreeably. "I know that," the doctor said, and Ben could feel the ice in it. General abrasions across the back, shoulders, buttocks, and legs. Minor lacerations in the same areas. The same condition on knees, hands, arms, and tops of his feet. Not so fast, Emma said. Arms and tops of what? Feet, the doctor said, and began to talk more slowly. Both feet cut, abraded and bruised, swollen but not infected. 2-inch long, clean cut on left cheek just below the eye. Entire body sunburned, but with negligible blistering. Then he flicked Ben on the shoulder with his fingertips and said, "Turn over." Lying on his back, Ben looked at the doctor as he went on examining him and reciting to Emma what was wrong with him. The doctor was so cold, so remote, that it made Ben feel uncomfortable, as though to the doctor he wasn't even human. Then he suddenly seemed interested as he picked up Ben's arm and looked where Maddock had shot him. "Hello, what's this?" he said, and then turned the arm over. He clamped down with his fingers. "Hurt?" "Yes, it does," Ben said, "but not much." The doctor flexed Ben's arm, moving and twisting it as he felt of the bones and tendons with his finger. At last he laid it down on the table and said, "Lucky." Then he said, "Nurse, gunshot wound, left arm 3 inches below the elbow. Clean entrance and exit wounds, minor damage, no bones involved." As the doctor swabbed out the purplish holes and then put adhesive bandages over them, Emma finished what she was writing and said, "You have to put in the report what to do with him. Except for the injuries noted, the patient is in apparently good health and can be released to the custody of the sheriff," the doctor said. Ben looked up at him, wondering why he had to be so unfriendly about everything. The doctor said, without any sympathy, "This is going to hurt." It hurt a lot, and as Ben watched him sewing up the cuts on his feet, he wondered if the doctor had to be so rough about it. He rammed that curved needle through Ben's feet as though he were sewing a ripped tarp. He finished putting the bandages on and went out, saying to Emma, "I'll be in the lab if anybody wants me. You better see to Mr. Maddock." As Emma started across the room, Ben said, "Is that all?" "All of what?" she said, and left. Ben was half-dressed, standing on his bandaged feet when Strick came in. He looked sore about something, and he leaned against the wall, waiting for Ben to finish. Ben couldn't get his boots on over the bandages, so he picked them up. He felt sick and weak and very tired. "You know what I'm going to do, Strick?" he said. "I'm going home and go to bed and sleep for a week, 1 week. Let's go down to the office first. I've got to get some sort of statement from you about all this." "Tomorrow," Ben said. "I'm really bushed, Strick." "Tonight would be better," Strick said, "while it's fresh in your mind." Ben smiled, and his lips felt as though they hadn't smiled in years. They were stiff and they hurt. "It's going to be fresh in my mind for the next 50 years. But Strick beckoned him to come, and in the corridor, headed him toward the front door. "What about my Jeep?" Ben asked. "It's been impounded as evidence." In the station wagon, Ben said, "How's Maddock?" "What do you care?" Strick asked unpleasantly. "What are you sore about, Strick?" Ben asked. Strick glanced at him as he turned in at the sheriff's office. "I try not to let it get to me, but sometimes the things people do to each other make me mad," he said. In the office, Strick went around behind his desk and sat down, motioning to Ben to sit in the chair in front of him. Picking up a piece of cardboard, Strick began to read from it rapidly and tonelessly. It was something about Ben's rights, that he could have an attorney, that he did not have to confess to anything if he didn't want to. Strick put the cardboard down and said, "Do you understand what I just read to you?" "That's why I'm here," Ben said. "There was an accident, and I'm reporting it. I don't need a lot of stuff about my rights, and I don't need any lawyers." Hold it, Strick cautioned him. "If you want to talk to me, here's a waiver for you to sign. Just sign it right here." He pushed the blank form across. "What for?" "It just says you heard me read you about your rights, and you understand what I read, and you're waiving them." Ben signed it. Strick took it back and put it in the drawer. Then he sat back in the chair, his arms over his head, and said quietly, "Why did you shoot him so many times, Ben?" Ben could see Maddox again, coming toward him, the big gun swinging in his hand. Then he saw Maddox down on the sand, still reaching for the gun. "To keep him from shooting me," Ben said. "Then how can that be an accident?" For a moment, Ben was confused. "Wait a minute, Strick. Who are you talking about?" "The old man," Strick said. "I'm talking about Maddox." Without any change in his voice or position, Strick said, "All I'm trying to do is find out what happened, Ben. What was the beef between you and the old man?" Half of Ben's face was numb from the Novocaine. It felt as though spit were running out the left side of his mouth, but he couldn't stop it. Suddenly it was hard for him to think about all this. It seemed so long ago. "Beef?" he asked. "I didn't even know that old man." "All right, then, let's go back to Mr. Maddox. How many times did you have to shoot him, Ben?" Ben tried to remember. "I don't know, Strick. Once to make him drop the gun, and a couple more times when he kept going for it. 3, 4. You shot him more than once, though. Is that right?" "Yeah, look, Strick, I'm really wiped out. Let's wait until tomorrow and then go through the whole thing." "Be a lot easier to get it over with now." "I can't even think straight now," Ben said. "Tomorrow." He pushed himself up out of the chair. "Give me a call when you're ready, and we'll go through the whole thing." As Ben started toward the door, Strick said quietly, "Where are you going, Ben?" "Home." "I can't let you do that, fella." Ben turned to look at him. Strick was writing something and said, without looking up at him, "I'm charging you with a felony aggravated assault, Ben." "Okay," Ben said, and started toward the door again, wondering what walking around in the bandages was doing to them. Then he stopped and looked back at Strick. "With what? What does that mean?" "It means you're not going home," Strick said, his voice different now, tough. "It means you're going to jail."